Now, they were once described as two bright sparks of the musical world. Violinist Cyril Hellier and his piano-playing brother Clifford, both from Bristol, were leading musicians from the 1920s to the 1960s. Cyril played with big names like Frank Sinatra and Shirley Bassey, whilst Clifford wrote symphonies, toured the world, and was head of entertainment for West Country soldiers during the war. The brothers wrote a lot of music together, which was broadcast in the 1930s on the radio, but only one song was ever recorded. So now Cyril's granddaughter, who is also a violinist, is recording her grandfather and great-uncle's compositions for the very first time.
I'm Rose Hinton, I'm a violinist, and my grandfather and his brother were musicians too and composers, and they played together as a violinist and a pianist, as a duo, and also in other bands in the 1930s and 40s and onwards. I didn't know Clifford, who is my great uncle actually, sadly, who I think actually died before I was born. But I did know my grandfather until I was about 5 even, I think perhaps when he died. So I only really remember him in his flat, sort of sitting in the chair and telling stories, and this wonderful rich deep voice. When I started the violin at 6, Mum was very aware of me being introduced to the music that her dad wrote. She's very proud of him and she's proud of his music. And as soon as I was old enough and advanced enough to be able to play even easier sections of it, I would, and I'd give little concerts of their music. Both of them went on to the Royal Academy of Music, which is where I went on to study in London. I think for a number of years before they went there, they travelled up to have lessons, or at least my grandfather did. They gave recitals all over, and they came back to Bristol quite a lot to play together, even when they moved to London. And then when they graduated, they thought that, the excitement was in the jazz scene. My grandfather joined a number of bands. He was with the Jack Hilton Band at one stage and was in the Savoy Orphans, which were the band that played at the Savoy in the evenings. There are these lovely little black diaries that we've still got of him with all of his penciled session recordings at Abbey Road and these great establishments. So they were obviously quite something at the time. What we're hoping to record are 5 special novelty arrangements, as they are called, of 5 of their published pieces for violin and piano. These were arranged in the 1930s and 40s over a period of time, and they were performed by the BBC Dance Orchestra with my granddad as the violin soloist. So they all feature violin solo parts with the dance orchestra background, which I think is quite special.
5:15, rah rah rah, BBC Dance Orchestra.
Some of their pieces were published, and so people can buy some parts that they wrote, but lots of the music was unpublished. There's such a wealth of it that I think it would be such a shame for it just to be left to be lost to time. And I do feel a personal responsibility because I am a violinist, and also I'm their granddaughter and great niece, that nobody else will do this if I don't. So that's the main motivation, really, that I feel it's me that needs to do it, and that I should be doing it, and that's my little piece of, that's me doing my bit for preserving that little piece of our British musical heritage.
Rose Hinton, granddaughter of Bristol musician Cyril Hellier. He and his brother Clifford were once described as a bright spark of the musical world, but only one of their songs was ever recorded. So Rose has crowdfunded to put together a whole album of their music. Really lovely story. I'll be speaking to Rose about this later on. It is 7:20. Now, the lost musical works of 2 Bristol brothers are about to be recorded for the very first time. Clifford and Cyril Hellier from Bristol were big names from the 1920s to the 1960s. Their works were heard by audiences on national BBC radio and in theatres across the world back then, but only one of their pieces has ever been recorded. So now, Cyril's granddaughter, the violinist Rose Hinton, is following in the family footsteps and has just crowdfunded for a whole orchestra to record their songs. Morning, Rose.
Good morning, James. Thanks so much
This is
for
a
having
lovely
me.
story. No, pleasure. Thank you for coming on. Tell me
No
a bit about your
problem.
grandfather and your great-uncle then.
Well, I'm really sorry to say that I actually never knew my great-uncle, which is terrible. But I do remember my grandfather when I was very young. Sadly, he died before I even started playing the violin. And so I never got to talk to him about being a violinist, which is what I've gone on to become. From family members, I've put together a lot about their incredible life together as musicians, but most importantly, the devotion they had to each other as brothers throughout their life.
And by the sounds of it, they had an incredible career for decades.
Absolutely. I mean, they both actually, grew up in Bristol, which is why we're talking today. Had quite a privileged childhood there, and travelled up to London to have lessons and played with their mother, that was also a singer and a pianist, giving concerts in Bristol. But then went on to study at the Royal Academy of Music, which is where I went in time, which is a nice link between us. And then decided not to carry on in the classical vein, even though they were classically trained, but actually to go down the jazz route. And my grandfather played in lots of the top bands of the time, the BBC Dance Orchestra with Henry Hall, the Jack Hilton Band, played with Mantovani, sessions for Decca. He had this star-studded career. And also kept up the concerts with his brother of their compositions, many of which were published. And Clifford did a lot of cruise ship work. Clifford is the pianist, my great-uncle. And I know that his travels east inspired lots of his compositions with titles like Chinese Rhythm and Rhythm of the East and all these exotic-sounding jazzy pieces that I think are so enjoyable and I hope to bring back to the public eye.
And given the time they were working, of course, in these days, everything gets recorded, everything gets put online or whatever. Clearly, none of that was around back in their day. So only one piece of theirs was ever recorded. Is that right?
Well, as far as I'm aware, there's only one commercial recording of Blue Strings, which is the piece that you've just been playing. Myself and the band leader of Down for the Count that I'm recording with put that together a few weeks ago as a sort of demo of our work. But there's only one commercial recording on an album called Homemade Jam, which is with Burt Furman's Quintuplets of Swing. And I believe there may be one archival recording at the BBC of my grandfather playing Chinese Rhythm, another piece I just mentioned, although I haven't heard it yet. I'm hoping that when lockdown ends, I'll be able to sort that out. And apart from that, it's just homemade records that they made at home, probably in the evening after they'd had a drink together. And, we're currently trying to update these old records onto CDs for ourselves, but it's not of the commercial quality that I hope our CD will be, exclusively dedicated to them.
It's a really lovely idea, and of course you've crowdfunded to be able to bring their music to life with a full orchestra going to record it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite an ambitious project. But Mike, I mentioned, from Down for the Count, has just been invaluable. He's so experienced. Their band, Down for the Count, is absolutely super, critically acclaimed. And I met them a few years ago through a friend that runs the City String Ensemble, of which I play with sometimes. And I love their work. And I just thought maybe this is the year to do my bit for our British musical heritage and approach him, and he said yes. So we're raising money. We've already reached our target of £3,000 in less than a week, which I'm overwhelmed by, and we've actually introduced a stretch target of a further £1,500 that we're really crossing our fingers will allow us to make the orchestra bigger and fuller and richer, and actually keep true to the authentic arrangement that was written at the time.
And that moment when you finally hear an orchestra playing the music of your grandfather and your great uncle, what will that feel like?
Oh, it would just be absolutely wonderful. I think it will be really special for me, both from the family perspective, but also because I think the sound of a solo violin with that vintage swing orchestra is quite unique and quite special, because often violins would be played as soloists in instrumentals, but with the absence of a vocalist, the violin is the star. And I think playing their music that I grew up with, playing with my sister on the piano, will be really, really exciting.
Well, Rose, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning. Rose Hinton, granddaughter of violinist Cyril Hellier from Bristol. She's about to record an album celebrating his and his brother Clifford's music.